Hello, everybody. Welcome to our new lecture on hyperspectral image classification. In the previous lecture, we have already talked a bit about classical methods, and then we have discussed also about different CNN based approaches. We have talked about how 1D convolution, how 2D convolution they are useful in hyperspectral image classification. Following this, we have also briefly discussed about channel attention and how is it useful in hyperspectral image classification. The channel attention, it can also be in some context called as spectral attention. And we have also talked about how 3D convolution is particularly useful in hyperspectral image classification. In today's lecture, we will take forward our discussion. We will discuss yet some variation in the architecture, and eventually we'll discuss hyperspectral image classification or hyperspectral image analysis with self-supervised learning or under semi-supervised learning, and why they are of interest to us. And eventually we'll also discuss a bit on hyperspectral anomaly detection. So with this, let us look at this hybrid attention mechanism for hyperspectral image classification. So in the last lecture, we have already seen that, okay, like we can make multi-branch network, right? We have seen like, okay, these branches can be a combination of 2D CNN and 3D CNN. Here, we are talking about rather using spectral attention and spatial attention simultaneously. This gives us the spectral attention features and the spatial attention features, which then we can now process, let's say using a 3D CNN branch to obtain the final classification map. So this particular architecture that we are discussing in this particular slide, this is inspired from the paper that is listed below. However, of course, we could have also varied the architecture a bit and come up with like different version of the architecture. However, what is the main message here is that since the spectral features and the spatial features both are very important in case of hyperspectral image analysis, hence the architecture needs to account somehow for both of them, which is emphasized in this particular architecture. Now moving forward, we know that hyperspectral images consist of significantly large number of spectral bands, and this enables us to treat the spectral bands as if they are sequences. This particular property we will be using again in the next few slides. However, at this point of time, what we would like to discuss is that, okay, this enables like the use as sequence enables us to use recurrent neural network for hyperspectral image analysis. We'll not go into the details of the recurrent neural network at this moment or any particular example of an architecture. However, this is just to be noted at this point of time. Now, let us move ahead to self-supervised learning in the context of hyperspectral images. As we have already mentioned before, that it is very challenging to annotate the hyperspectral data. Most of the cases when we are dealing with the hyperspectral data, we are not really interested, like course labels like building and water body. Rather, we are interested in much fine-grained labels. We will see some example of hyperspectral datasets in today's lecture itself, and there we'll also see some example classes in those datasets. Since labeling hyperspectral datasets, so this again I'm trying to emphasize, it's not just property of the data itself, it's also what kind of task we are using it for. So since this requires a degree of expertise, this is very challenging to obtain large quantity of label data, and self-supervised learning thus becomes a promising paradigm here, which enable us to learn representation without annotations. We have already discussed about self-supervised learning before in our course. So we'll see how this can be used in the context of hyperspectral image analysis. And of course, once we have been able to use self-supervised learning on hyperspectral data, we can potentially use the pre-trained model to fine-tune for specific tasks with limited amount of annotated data. So one obvious question, of course, you would ask at this point of time is that can't you do this with a model which has been pre-trained on, let's say, ImageNet? Many times when working with the multispectral images, we indeed do that, right? However, that is possible only because there, like in the ImageNet, we are talking about 3 channels. In the multispectral, we are also talking most often 3 or close to 3 channels. In the hyperspectral image, we are talking about really large number of bands, and we cannot just use a model which has been pre-trained on ImageNet or some other such data set and fine-tune on our hyperspectral data. So with this background, let us now try to think about a SSL pipeline for hyperspectral images. So we'll start by generating maybe augmented views of hyperspectral patches, and then we can learn invariant spectral spatial representation. We can use contrastive objective, and then we can fine-tune using small labeled dataset. So this is one particular pipeline. If we want to use contrastive objective, of course, we can use other kind of objectives as well, where the pipeline would be slightly different. But this can indeed work as one of the possible or one of the rather most preferred pipeline. Okay, now let us think a bit about how would we generate augmented views. Augmented views, as we remember from discussion on the contrastive learning based approaches, this is indeed very important, right? And the augmented views, they should not be very similar. If we from a particular image I, we are creating 2 data I1 and I2, the two augmented views, they should not be, like very similar. Then for the self-supervised learning, doesn't have an enough challenging task. Whereas on the other hand, they should not be like so dissimilar that it doesn't make sense anymore to call I1 and I2 augmented views of each other. So the possibilities range from spatial cropping. So this has been already discussed in the normal image analysis context as well. So given, like, if you remember, like given a image like let's say 224 cross 224, one could, let's say, crop 112 cross 112 patches from this larger size image and consider them as different views. However, this kind of spatial cropping might not be so straightforward applicable in the hyperspectral images, especially if we think about coarse spatial resolution, here, images. There, the two different views two different crops may indeed represent just totally two different concepts and not represent a same concept. Indeed, hyperspectral data sets are often very small also. So many times it just, like one scene which is considered a data set. And there we need to be very careful indeed to take spatial crops and treating them as augmented views of each other. However, we should not rule out the possibility of using spatial cropping as augmented view. Again, we have to decide based on the particular application, particular spatial resolution of the sensor that we are working with. Probably slightly on the more convenient side is spectral masking. The spectral masking can remove selected spectral bands. So given particular number, let's say we have 200 bands, what we could do is that in one of the view we can remove some 20 bands, in another view we can remove another 20 bands. By removing, we don't need to really actually just remove and make it like a 180 dimensional vector. We can just let's say turn off those bands, like equate them to 0 or something like that. And another similar approach would be spectral jittering, where we perturb, like let's say add some noise to some or all of the bands. Again, in a way, the spectral jittering can be thought as a spectral jittering and spectral masking, they're very related, right? So both of them work in the spectral domain and a bit more convenient than the spatial cropping approach in this particular case. Now, let us think about, like, if we wanted to do pretext task-based self-supervised learning, let us think a bit about some of the pretext task-based SSL approaches that we can design for hyperspectral image analysis. And to think that, first we have to start from some of the approaches that we have already studied in the case of our normal multispectral or let's say RGB images. So you would remember, like, some of the approaches were like, let's say image rotation was one of them. Let's say we divide the image into grids and then we take a different permutation combination of those grids, the patches. That's one of them. So some of these can now be translated to the hyperspectral image analysis as well. So let us see some of them. So one possibility, so again, think of this patch reordering. So you divide the image into patch and you reorder the patches, and there we were working on the spatial domain. And the common formula most of the time we are working with that whatever is in the spatial domain, we are somehow converting them into the spectral domain for hyperspectral image, right? So instead of reordering the patches, what one can do here is simply band reordering. So we take a reordering of the bands, we shuffle the bands, and then based on this, several prediction tasks can be created. So one very simple prediction task could be is that, okay, just answering the question whether a band reordering has been applied or not. So that will be just a simple binary kind of answering. The other more sophisticated questions can be asked, like let's say a particular band reordering is mapped to a particular output index. So in this similar way, we can take 10 different band reordering, and we can now ask, okay, like which of these 10 band reordering has been applied, and the no band reordering can be one of these 10 possible combinations. So this is one possible pretext task. Similarly, we can apply masked spectral modeling. We can randomly mask spectral bands during the training, and network predicts this missing spectral information. This encourages understanding of spectral dependencies. So at some point in one of the later weeks, when we have already discussed vision transformer and all, we'll see that masked image modeling indeed is one of the popular approaches for self-supervised learning in the era of vision transformer. And masked spectral modeling in the similar way is a nice possibility for hyperspectral image self-supervised learning. Now, so we talked about self-supervised learning, and in the same context, another learning paradigm that comes into picture is semi-supervised learning. Indeed, annotation is costly and time-consuming for hyperspectral image analysis, as I have already mentioned. It may end up that some classes have very few labeled samples. Indeed, often what happens is that many hyperspectral image practical application ends up being like this, that given a particular scene, given ROI that we are working with, we have labeled data, some labeled data scattered across the scene. However, we don't have, like all the pixels labeled. And in this kind of scenario, semi-supervised learning becomes a strong candidate. So here, and given this particular background that I just gave to you right now, that given a particular scene, we have some of the pixels which are labeled and some of the pixels which are not labeled. In this kind of scenario also, interestingly, not just any semi-supervised learning, rather graph neural networks come into picture. So the graph neural network, this enables us to capture both spatial relationship and also spectral relationship. We'll come to spectral relationship soon. We can use the property that the nearby pixels, or even if we take, let's say, superpixels, so depending on the spatial resolution, we'll probably work with pixels or with superpixels, and we can use the property that, okay, they probably will belong to the similar classes. And now treating these pixels or the superpixels as node of the graph, we can naturally model the interaction between them. Now, using GNNs, we can propagate information between these nodes, and thus between these pixels or the superpixels which are actually forming the nodes. So again, GNN is something that we will not go into the depth in this particular course. If you are interested, you can refer to one of the deep learning course or book. However, what's interesting for us at this point is how do we construct a graph out of the hyperspectral image, especially considering this particular problem scenario that we have talked about, where some of these pixels are labeled. So we can treat the pixel or the superpixel as graph node, as I already mentioned, and the edges connect the spectrally similar neighbors. So we can define the edges in a manner there we can take, like the spectral information also into account. So not just, like you can model in a way that, okay, both how closer these nodes are in spatial domain if you want, but you can also use spectral properties there. And thereby you enable the GNN to also capture the spectral context that is present in the image, which is very important for the hyperspectral image, right? And then adjacency matrices will represent the graph connectivity. Thus, the graph structure will capture both spectral, spatial relationship. Okay. Now, let us take a couple of minutes to look into a couple of hyperspectral datasets that have been used in many papers. So one of them is Indian Pines dataset. Indian Pines dataset was captured by Aviris sensor. It captures an agricultural scene with multiple crop types. It contains about, I intentionally wrote it as about 224 spectral bands. So what happens is that depending on actual paper that we're looking at, most of the time you'll see that, okay, you are actually working with a subset of the spectral bands because the papers are not working on water absorption or some other set of bands, and they have like, let's say 200 bands out of these 224 bands, or maybe a different number as a pre-processing step. Now, here are a few sample classes. This is not all the classes names. I just listed here 3 classes names. The classes are soybean not-till, soybean min-till, and soybean clean. And this again will probably make it clear to you that how very similar kind of things are considered as different classes when we are working with hyperspectral image analysis. I mean, we are using, of course, hyperspectral images only for those kind of application. If the application doesn't need that kind of spectral information, why would we even use hyperspectral image for? Then we would just use RGB image or some multispectral image, let's say RGB NIR. If we need this kind of granularity, only then we use hyperspectral images. And this is, of course, more of an academic data set. Depending on your practical application, maybe you will have classes which are even more challenging. Similarly, let us look at another dataset called the Pavia University dataset, which has been collected using Rosys sensor. It captures an urban area in Italy. So in contrast to the previous dataset that we just saw, which captured an agricultural area, this particular case captures an urban area. And hyperspectral images are, of course, also interesting for the urban classes as well, depending on the particular application. So this one contains about 103 spectral bands. And again, see the classes. It captures challenging classes like asphalt, meadows, trees, buildings. One very important aspect that might have been already clear to you by now is that in the case of hyperspectral images, when we are working with hyperspectral images, it's not just, like the geographical shift or seasonal shift that we are facing. So geographical shift, seasonal shift, that causes domain shift when we are working with multispectral images, and that often causes challenge for us to, when we have trained a model trained on particular data set, and when we are trying to, let's say, like we have trained on a data set from Munich and then we are trying to apply it on Delhi, or on a particular season, summer, and then we are trying to apply in winter, right? But in the case of the hyperspectral sensors, this is also a very strong shift between the different sensors, depending on which particular sensor you are working with. Sometimes you're working with 220 bands, sometimes you're working with, let's say, 150 bands. The difference is quite strong. Okay. Now, let us move ahead to our discussion on anomaly detection. First, let us try to define anomaly. So, anomaly detection identifies spectrally rare targets. In our case of the hyperspectral images, no prior target signatures are required for anomaly detection. If we had a target signature, this will become more a target detection task rather than not anomaly detection task. Anomalies differ significantly from surrounding background. It has importance in several applications like surveillance, environmental monitoring. We'll come to that again. Hyperspectral anomaly detection exploits the rich spectral information in the hyperspectral data and the property that the materials exhibit generally unique spectral signatures, and thus subtle spectral deviations become detectable. This enables detection of small, small objects or some kind of camouflaged objects. Thus, hyperspectral anomaly detection has strong application in defense surveillance. Let's say particular materials of interest are stored somewhere by ROC agencies, and the security agencies are interested, to understand those signatures. So these security agencies will not have an prior idea of what particular kind of materials are being used by the ROC agencies. This will act as an anomaly detection rather not target detection. Similarly, other applications such as sometimes mineral exploration can be modeled as anomaly detection. Let us quickly also try to understand the difference between target detection versus anomaly detection. Target detection usually requires known target signature, whereas anomaly detection assumes unknown target. So it doesn't require a known target signature a priori. Hyperspectral anomaly detection focuses on spectral rarity, and it's of course more challenging than supervised target detection or supervised hyperspectral image classification related tasks. So this is a very simplified illustration of hyperspectral anomaly detection. You can think of the green, indicating the spectral signature of the background. Of course, the background itself will not have just one particular material. However, for simplicity here, we are showing with just one color. And then in the red, what we see is the spectral signature corresponding to an anomalous object. So with this background, let us take forward our discussion in the next lecture. We'll stop here. Thank you.